Okay, chapter 6. In this chapter, we will look at unemployment, the definition of unemployment. Okay? Now, let me give you a sense of where we're going with chapters 5, 6, and 7. Chapter 5, which we have just completed, dealt with GDP, correct? Chapter 5 dealt with GDP. Chapter 6 deals with unemployment. And chapter 7 deals with inflation. Now, these are all exceedingly important macroeconomic concepts. And they really relate to three goals. All economies have these three major goals. And one goal is to have low unemployment. This is the goal of really every country. Low unemployment. Right? The second goal is to have low inflation. Countries in which the cost of living rises too rapidly are countries that really want to reverse that process, correct? They would like to see price stability. So price stability is another important macroeconomic goal. And the third goal is to have a high rate of economic growth. So these are three macroeconomic goals, and they all relate to chapters 5, 6, and 7. Let's consider low unemployment. Now, in order to understand what that goal is, we need to understand what unemployment is, correct? So these are then related. We need to define unemployment in order to understand that particular macroeconomic goal of low unemployment, right? Consider the second goal, low inflation. Now, in order to understand exactly what that is, we need to know what inflation is. Hence, chapter 7 will be linked to goal number 2. Right? And third goal is to have a high rate of economic growth. And what is economic growth? Economic growth is really defined as the percentage change in real GDP from one year to the next. So we say that our economy has grown 2% between last year and this year if today's real GDP is 2% larger than real GDP last year. Correct? So in order to understand growth, we need to know exactly what GDP is. Right? So these chapters here, which all deal with definitions, these are all chapters that deal with definitions. They all relate to these three macroeconomic goals. Okay? So now, in this chapter, we will study the meaning of unemployment, given the important macroeconomic goal of low unemployment. Okay? And this is how the government proceeds to figure out unemployment. Every month, 1,600 interviewers who work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the US agency tasked with doing this. So 1,600 employees of BLS. By the way, it's not just the BLS, it's also the Bureau of the Census. So in a sense, this is joint work by two agencies of the US government. These 1,600 interviewers survey 60,000 households. So every month, 60,000 households are contacted. Okay? And these people are interviewed. And they're asked all kinds of questions, mainly about how much they worked in the preceding week. So they're asked, did you work in the preceding week? And if the answer is yes, then they ask, how many hours did you work in the preceding week? Correct? If a person says, I didn't work at all, then they ask this person, so You say you didn't work at all, but were you looking for work? You see? So these are the kinds of questions that these 60,000 households are asked every month. And based on these answers, every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics announces an unemployment rate for the nation. Right? Now, why is it just 60,000 households? Why isn't it everyone? Any thoughts? You see, this is a survey. This is a survey as opposed to what's called a census. A census covers everyone. Now, how often in this country do we have a census? Any thoughts? How often in this country do we have a census, which means everyone in the nation is asked questions? Yes, every 10 years. Every 10 years. We have a census in the US every 10 years. Correct? Now, why is it every 10 years and not every month? Because it would be such a huge job to do this every month, to contact 320 million Americans. Correct? So therefore, since this is a monthly thing, we resort to a survey. We don't do a census, we do a survey. So these 60,000 households are supposed to be representative. They are supposed to be representative of the US. So these households are chosen quite carefully. They aren't all well-off people, for instance. There has to be a mix of rich, middle class, and poor in this mix. There also has to be sufficient regional representation. They all can't come from the northeastern United States, for instance. They would have to come from all over the country, right? So this is a representative sample of Americans. And the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, bases its monthly unemployment figures on this survey. Okay? Now, based on the answers given by the people, by these 60,000 households, every person in this household is put into a certain box or category. And instead of having you read this, I am going to go to my drawing board, and I'm going to tell you exactly how the BLS classifies people. Okay, I'm going to draw a number of boxes. All right. In the first box up here, this box is called the civilian non-institutional population. It is also, by the way, called the working age population. In fact, your book calls it the working age population. But the real, full, detailed description would be civilian non-institutional population. Right? Now, who are these people? So in every household, you have all kinds of people of different ages. Am I correct? You have babies, you have 12-year-olds, you have those who are 16 and older. Some households have military personnel in them. Correct? And some households will report to you that a member of the household is currently incarcerated. Right? So what exactly does the government do here? First, it counts only those who are 16 or older. So people who are younger than that are not even put in this box. They are kept outside this box. So you have to be at least 16 to be counted in this box, right? Secondly, you have to be civilian, which means that if you're in the military, you are excluded, right? Civilian. Next, non-institutional. So you have to be someone who is currently not institutionalized. Now, what is an institution? Would you consider yourself institutionalized? Well, this is an institution, isn't it? No, that's not institutionalized means, right? Who is institutionalized? Well, someone in a mental institution, for instance. But mainly in the States, we are talking about jail. Did you know that the US has one of the world's largest incarcerated populations? Huge. Okay? So you have to be civilian, you have to be non-institutionalized, and you have to be 16 or older. If you meet these criteria, you are put in that box. Okay? Then, remember, the Bureau of Labor Statistics asks the members of this household questions like, did you work last week? If you did, what kind of work was it? Was it work for somebody else, or was it work in a family business? How many hours did you work? Things of that nature, right? Based on answers to those questions, we next have the following categorization that takes place. You are either in the labor force, or you are out of the labor force. And I'll explain this in a second. Now, who is considered to be in the labor force? In the labor force, you would put everyone who's reported being employed. In other words, all employed people are part of the labor force. How does the government figure out who is employed? The government has a very easy criteria. As long as you say you worked at least 1 hour in the preceding week for pay, just 1 hour, the government considers you to be employed. You follow me? So if you worked 1 hour for wages in the preceding week, government considers you to be employed. Now, if you say that you did work, but you didn't get paid because you were working in a family business, now that can happen, correct? You work in the family store or something, you're not really paid. You're expected to help out, right? In that case, the government says, well, you have to be working at least 15 hours in the preceding week without pay in a family business. Then you are considered to be employed, right? So who is considered to be employed? 1 plus hours for pay, 15 plus hours without pay in family business. That's the US government's criteria. Other countries would have different criteria, but this is how the US Bureau of Labor Statistics works. Now, let's say that you report to the government that you did not work at all last week. Where would the government put you now? This box, of course, here is the unemployed box. Would the government stick you in that box? So you are someone who is 16 or older, you're a civilian, you're not institutionalized. You tell the BLS interviewer that you didn't work at all last week, right? By the way, is there anyone here in this classroom who would fit that bill? In other words, if BLS asked you, did you work at all last week? How many of you would say, I did not work last week? Okay, so you have a few people here who said they didn't work at all last week. So where would the government put you? In which box do you think? Would the government consider you to be unemployed? Would you be part of the nation's unemployed? Now, why didn't you work? You're in school, right? Meaning school is preventing you from working. Would that be correct for you too? Yes. So for some people, full-time studies prevents you from working. Now, should such people be considered to be unemployed? Would it be fair to consider them to be unemployed? No, because they're really not even interested in work at this point. Is that correct? So if you are someone who reports that you didn't work at all, the next question the government will ask you is, did you actively look for work in the past week? And if your answer to that is no also, the government will stick you in this box. You're out of the labor force. So who is out of the labor force? Those who are non-employed and not looking for work. So if you are not employed and not looking for work, that's when you are out of the labor force. So who then is unemployed? Who would be unemployed? Is there anyone in this class who didn't work last week but wanted to work last week? Is there anyone in this class like that? You wanted to work, right? Did you actively look for work? There you go. You would be somebody that the government would consider to be unemployed then. You didn't work, but you were actively looking for work. Correct? So that would be this category here. Non-employed and actively looking for work. That's your unemployed person. Correct? So who is unemployed then? To be unemployed, what must a person be doing? A person who is currently not working must be doing what in order to be considered unemployed? Looking for work, actively looking for work, exactly. All right, now we come to the definition of the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is a percentage figure. There's someone here with a smartphone. Would you perhaps look the unemployment rate, the latest unemployment rate for me, if you don't mind? You would probably get a figure for last month, January. Does anyone have an answer for me yet?
For December, it's 5.6.
For December was 5.6%. The figure for January is not out yet, I suppose. Is there a January figure there? Okay. For January? So you see these unemployment rates, these monthly figures that the BLS puts out are percentages. So what exactly is this? How are these percentages calculated? Okay. The unemployment rate, quite simply, is this percentage. This is your unemployment rate, meaning the unemployment rate is the number unemployed expressed as a percentage of the labor force. You see? So people in, which box are we talking about now? This box here as a percentage of that box. That's your unemployment rate. So when in January the unemployment rate is 5.7%, what does that mean? That means that of every 100 people in the labor force, 5.7, or that's for every 1,000 people in the labor force, 57 were unemployed. So that was your January figure there. So that's how the unemployment rate is calculated. So now we have this firm understanding of the unemployment rate. Correct? Now there are some other rates that the BLS also reports. And one other important rate is called the labor force participation rate. And the labor force participation rate is this percentage here. So this is the percentage labor force participation rate. So what is the labor force participation rate then? It is the number of people in the labor force box divided by the number of people in the, I'm going to just, to make this short, I'm going to call it CNP, civilian non-institutional population. So the number of people in the CNP box times 100 to convert that into a percentage. So that is the labor force participation rate. And there is one last rate that I'd like to talk about today before I stop, and that is something called the employment rate. Okay? And let me tell you what the employment rate is. I'm going to draw a new line from here to here. And this percentage here, this would be the percentage employment rate. And the employment rate is defined as the number employed divided by the size of the CNP, not the labor force, but the civilian non-institutional population times 100. So that is the employment rate. So how many rates have we learned in class today? 3 rates, right? We have the unemployment rate, we have the labor force participation rate, and we lastly have the employment rate. And we will stop here today.